Back in 1854, the Newcastle and Gateshead quaysides looked very different from today. Warehouses lined the river, which carried a constant flow of coal and other goods. Newcastle reaped the benefits of the Industrial Revolution, open for global trade. Robert Stephenson built this high-level bridge in 1849, carrying road and rail traffic. Where the swing bridge stands, 9 low arches supported the 1771 Time Bridge. At midnight on the 6th of October, a small fire broke out in the upper floor of Wilson & Sons' worsted manufacturing building on the Gateshead side, where the Hilton now stands. At the time, observers suspected that the wall had fallen onto a gaslight. Back then, we employed a haphazard approach to fighting fires, with hand-operated pumps carried by horse-drawn wagons. North British and Newcastle fire engines struggled to contain the fire. Bertram's bonded warehouse next door stored 128 tonnes of sodium nitrate fertiliser and over 2,080 tonnes of sulphur. Both of these could be used to make explosive back powder. All that's needed is carbon or a similar granular fuel. The blazing wood factory sent sparks and flames into the bigger warehouse. The firefighters concentrated on this new threat, but their puny efforts against the raging flames did little. Torrents of molten sulphur poured from every crack, illuminating the river with a ghostly shimmering blue light as it burned. People thronged to this river to see the spectacle, with many using the high-level bridge as a perfect viewing platform. They heard a low rumble, then another, unaware of the danger. A third rumble went unheeded before the building flew apart in a violent explosion. People 32 kilometres away heard the blast. The force demolished nearby property in an instant, propelled large boulders aloft, then crashed through roofs, tumbled houses and shattered the nearby parish church. Warehouse owner Charles Bertram rushed to the scene while sharing a pinch of snuff with Gateshead Mayor David Haggie. The explosion threw him into the air. Rescuers found nothing but his snuff box and a house key. The fire spread to the Newcastle side, where it engulfed the dense riverside east of Guildhall. Debris crashed through the custom house roof. The force shattered every window and wrenched doors off their hinges. The explosion levelled buildings opposite Bertram's and set ablaze those that remained standing. The flames on the Newcastle side died down by early afternoon the next day, but the Gateshead fire burned on for several hours, consuming everything flammable. The fire killed 53 people, including John Dobson's second son, 26-year-old Alexander. Around 500 people were injured in the fire and explosion. The Newcastle quayside remained in ruins for years.
In 1856, the council appointed John Dobson to oversee the redevelopment. The councillors approved his street plan. Ralph Waters, a Newcastle-born developer, purchased the land. Dobson hired architect William Parnell to design some of the buildings. London-born Parnell lived in Newcastle. In 1861, he designed St Nicholas buildings. He began planning Princess Building, Phoenix House, and Exchange Building for the new development. Prince's Building, built in 1863 as a 4-storey sandstone ashlar structure with a Welsh slate roof, stands alone between Queen Street, King Street and Akenside Hill. The main elevation on Queen Street is balanced by a 4-3-4 central bay layout between the 3-bay heavier corner sections. The ground floor features shop fronts set between plain pilasters, with the first floor maintaining the plain pilaster design. The second floor is graced by Tuscan columns with a heavy entablature, whilst windows on the third floor are flanked by plain mullions. Dormers with predominant eaves rise above a heavy cornice. The east range in King Street and the rear facade in Akenside Hill possess less architectural character. Builders removed a portion of the top story during construction of the new Tyne Bridge in 1926. Phoenix House rose from the ashes in 1869, built with the Royal Insurance Company in mind. It still displays the company's emblem over the corner door. Sandstone ashlar covers the exterior under a slate roof. The building occupies a curved site from Sand Hill to Queen Street. It comprises a basement and 4 stories. 6 window bays face Sand Hill, 3 to the curved corner and 5 along Queen Street. For the corner, Parnell used Tuscan columns, entablature and cornice on the ground floor, but larger Corinthian columns spanning the first and second floors, with a heavy cornice to give an impressive entrance. Smaller Corinthian columns extend along the sides, with plain pilasters on the ground floor. Curved top bays look out from the 4th floor corner, sitting under another small cornice, with Palladian arcades to each side face. An acroterion perches high, giving a pleasing symmetry to this difficult plot. The final building I'll show you is the most majestic. Parnell's square plan Exchange building of 1861 enjoys a rectangular central atrium. It faces Quayside, Lombard Street, Queen Street and King Street. Its basement lies below 5 stories with attic rooms above. The whole building shines with sandstone ashlar. At the front, a shallow entrance porch supported by double Tuscan columns covers steps to a panelled entrance, now leading to the Slug and Lettuce restaurant. The overlight is obscured by an incongruent commercial sign. There are smaller but less impressive entrances on the other 3 sides. High above the quayside entrance and balcony, a central Venetian-style 5th story looks out across the Tyne. The rusticated ground floor with keyed round-headed windows extends on all sides. Dainty Corinthian columns support a balcony entablature on the 2nd story. Round-headed bays abound on the 3rd story, with those in the 2nd from the last flanked by tall, narrow windows under segmented pediments. The hotel dining hall occupies the quayside Lombard Street corner, once a Barclays Bank branch. The main hotel entrance is along this face. For many years, the shipping agent William Mathwin and Son occupied a substantial part of this building. That company brokered ship sales, imported steel, and traded in coal. The Admiralty appointed Mathwin's sole coal agent for the fleet in 1893. In more modern times, Martin Oliver worked there from aged 16, joining his father, Albert.
The building's basically been my life, pretty much all my life. You know, from a young kid, I used to go down to Christmas parties because my father had worked there since the 50s and worked his way up to the managing director. So we used to go to Christmas parties, birthday parties of staff who I got to know over the years. And at that particular time, I really didn't have a love for the building. It was just basically a building where my father worked. Then in the 80s, I got the chance after leaving school at 16 to go and work for the company. So I took that chance with open arms. When I started with the company, we worked on the shipping side. So basically, it was my job with my manager to get the ships, the insurance organised. My father would be buying the cargo. Then basically, once the cargoes arrived in Newcastle, they would be sold. And at the age of about 18, 19, I got the chance of moving across to the sales side of the business, where once the cargo was on its way from mainly Germany, Belgium, Norway, Sweden, we would be on the telephone phoning all our customers, big companies like ourselves, also the small coal merchants delivering coal to the houses. And basically my job was to make sure the cargo was sold before it arrived here in the UK, and I totally loved that part of the job. Then it was just a cold old building. You know, when I used to go as a very young kid, about sort of 5 or 6, to these parties and going into my father's office, he had a beautiful office, all mahogany lined, big fireplace, coal fires burning. It was lovely. You could feel the heat once you walked into the walked into the rooms. By the time I got there, they'd taken all the coal fires out. There was gas fires, and if you can imagine, there were big Victorian, high ceilings, and these little gas fires just didn't used to heat the room. So you used to come in on a morning, 9 o'clock in the morning, and it was absolutely freezing. So you'd be sitting with your coat on at your desk. Probably 11 o'clock in the morning, you could finally take it off. That was I certainly remember that part of it. We also had a revolving door, big mahogany revolving door on Lombard Street. The company had been there for over 100 years by the time I left it, but we had the biggest suite of offices in Exchange Buildings on Lombard Street, with, as I say, its own swing door, so I always remember that. I can always remember downstairs in the basement, because the ladies used to be downstairs, the toilets, and when the tide ever used to get too high, occasionally we would have flooding downstairs. But downstairs, I always remember there was a little corridor, no lights, no electricity downstairs, but some light used to get through, and I used to sneak downstairs on my lunch break and wander down this corridor into the old buildings, and there was still things in these rooms as if somebody had literally just put the pen down and walked away on a Friday. It was that creepy. And those are the other things I've started to remember about the building as well. I was originally a member of another group, and I decided to do a posting, and I thought, which building in Newcastle do I know the most about? So I chose Exchange Buildings. And that post did so well that a few people said, well, why don't you set up your own group? And that's something which I'd never contemplated at that particular time, but I thought I'll give it a go. So I used Exchange Buildings as the main photo for the group. And again, my first posting was about Exchange Buildings. And as time went on, amazingly, we had a few people who'd either worked in exchange buildings who could tell me their story, and we've had 2 people so far who actually worked for Mathwins, one in the 50s and one who was a secretary in the 60s. Both knew my father, which again was amazing for me because it opened a door to information we didn't know before, yes. They mentioned people's names or the members of staff who I can't picture, but the names ring a bell because obviously my father used to talk about them. So as the group has grown, I thought the next stage was to book a night in the hotel, which is part of exchange buildings to this day. Although the hotel doesn't take the suite of offices that I used to work in, directly above on the 2nd floor is where the hotel is. And believe it or not, the room that they gave me was directly above the room I used to work in when I was in Mathwins. So that, to somebody else, it is just a night in a hotel, but to me, it's just so hard to explain the feeling, the passion I have for the building. The more you find out about the building, it seems to grow even stronger. Since starting the group, I found out that William Parnell was the architect of the building. He also designed several of the other buildings. We have Phoenix House and Prince's Buildings, which are all around Lombard Street and exchange buildings. So I now have a whole history of William Parnell from when he began in London, when he was born, his childhood, right the way through to him getting involved with John Dobson and also coming to Newcastle and designing those buildings as well. Now, he also designed the Tyne Theatre. That was probably his biggest achievement in Newcastle, even though I would certainly say his biggest achievement is exchange buildings, but as I say, that's myself. Basically, I've learned all about the Mathwin family. We always thought, and I think even my father thought, they began in Wales, and I've obviously proved my father wrong. Actually, they were from Newcastle. They started off just along the quayside, and that company folded, and William and his father set up a business. I even have an original letter which went out to all the other shipping offices, import offices of the time, basically saying that they were setting up their own company and they would be based in exchange buildings. So that letter was given to me. I'm the 3rd person to own that letter now. It's been passed on to me and I treasure that very dearly. When I had a night in the hotel, I had a drink in the bar and I looked up at the ceiling and I noticed how ornate the ceiling was. Now it seemed a bit strange because our offices, which were right next door, never had those type of ceilings. There were beautiful offices with coving, etc., but they didn't have the ornate ceiling. And it was a couple of months later that just by chance somebody on the group posted a photograph of the front of exchange buildings, and a member commented that she used to work there and it was Barclays Bank. So I put 2 and 2 together, and obviously the reason for the ornate ceiling was that the very front corner of exchange buildings had actually been a bank. And that turns out that it originally was Martin's Bank, which then later was taken over by Barclays Bank. And I think it closed, not definitely sure, I'm still researching that, but I think it closed probably late 60s. And when we moved out of exchange buildings, it was around about 1993. The Chronicle did a big article, actually. They came and took photographs, as I remember. We were the last import and export company on the quayside, and probably the oldest, but the last one to move off the quayside at that time. And it was derelict for several years, and it was about 2013, if I remember rightly, that the building was bought and basically totally gutted, sadly, because a lot of lovely features did disappear. But it was turned into a hotel, thankfully, so it's had a second lease of life. It was the main part was a hotel. The Slug and Lettuce is there now. There's also a bar, which I can't think of the name of, but still a lot of the building is still empty. But the hotel, luckily, has taken over a big chunk of it. As it's a listed building, they've had to keep the ornate staircase, the stained glass windows, which are really beautiful if anybody ever visits the hotel and has a chance to stay there.
From that 1854 fire sprang some handsome buildings, today flanked by the mighty Tyne Bridge. Phoenix House, Princess Building and Exchange Building are a splendid heritage laid out by Dobson and realised by William Parnell. Their names live on in this restaurant in Princess Building.
Watch some more from Radio Jonaphone. Subscribe to the channel. Enjoy.